The gap between people who build wealth and people who don't is almost never about how much money they earn. Thomas Corley spent 5 years tracking 233 millionaires, 177 of whom built their wealth from scratch, interviewing them, studying their habits, and reading 3 years of their daily activity diaries. What he found was that the biggest difference wasn't income, it wasn't luck, and it wasn't education. It was a specific set of spending categories that wealthy people had quietly removed from their lives. These are purchases that feel normal, even smart to most people, but which, in the data, function as silent wealth transfers. Money that moves from your future self to someone else's bottom line right now. There are 7 of them, and once you see the pattern, you won't be able to unsee it. The first one surprises almost nobody when they hear it, but the numbers behind it are more extreme than most people expect. In Corley's dataset, 94% of wealthy respondents did not buy lottery tickets. Not occasionally, not rarely, essentially never. Among lower wealth comparison subjects in the same study, 77% bought them regularly. The lottery is, from a pure financial standpoint, the most asymmetric bet a person can make. And behavioral economics research shows that humans are wired to dramatically overestimate their chances of winning when the prize is large enough. Wealthy people, on the whole, had simply opted out of that wiring. The second category is one that catches people off guard because it looks like success from the outside. Stanley and Danko's research, published in The Millionaire Next Door, found that high-net-worth individuals consistently drive used or mid-priced vehicles, not the luxury cars that people associate with wealth. A new car loses a significant portion of its value the moment it leaves the dealership, which means the person who buys it new absorbs the steepest part of the depreciation curve immediately. The person who buys the same car 2 years later, used, gets most of the same utility for a fraction of the original price, and wealthy people in the data were far more likely to be that second buyer. The car is also, in many social environments, a signal, and Corley's millionaires had largely stopped spending money on signals. The third category is one that sounds like a reward for success, which is exactly why it functions so effectively as a wealth trap. Wealthy respondents in the Rich Habits dataset were markedly less likely to own vacation homes than middle-income earners in comparable income brackets. A vacation property carries fixed costs, mortgage payments, maintenance, property tax, insurance, depreciation, that run whether or not the owner uses it, whether it sits empty for 11 months of the year or not. The asset is also illiquid, meaning it can't be converted to cash quickly if circumstances change, and its value is tied to a local market that the owner usually cannot control. Wealthy people in the data treated travel as an experience to be purchased temporarily, rented, time-shared, or paid for as needed, not a property to be owned and maintained indefinitely. The fourth category is one that applies to almost every consumer product category on the market today. Corley found that wealthy subjects were dramatically less likely than comparison groups to buy the newest model of anything: phones, electronics, appliances, or cars. The logic is the same depreciation curve that applies to vehicles. The first owner of a new product model absorbs the steepest drop in value, while the person who buys the same model 12 to 18 months later, used or refurbished, gets almost identical utility at a significantly lower cost. Self-made millionaires in the data were, in effect, deliberate lag buyers, and the money saved was the difference between retail price and the post-depreciation second-hand value of the same item. The fifth category is where people tend to push back the hardest, because each individual purchase looks too small to matter. Recurring low-cost discretionary spending, bottled water, premium coffee every morning, small impulse buys treated as daily treats, compounds into a significant annual cost that most people have never actually calculated. Corley found that self-made millionaires were more likely than comparison subjects to drink tap water, prepare coffee at home, and apply a conscious filter between wants and needs to everyday spending. The phrase he uses repeatedly in his research is "live below your means," not as a punishment, but as a deliberate gap between income and spending that creates room for money to move toward assets rather than disappearing into daily comfort purchases. The sixth category is closely related, and it's one that the fashion and retail industry spends billions of dollars a year making difficult to avoid. In Corley's data and in the earlier Stanley and Danko research, wealthy individuals shopped for clothing based on fit, function, and durability, not brand name, not social signal, not status marker. Mid-tier retailers, practical choices, items purchased because they perform a function, not because they communicate an identity. The distinction the researchers draw is direct. Clothing purchased for the signal it sends is consumption. Clothing purchased for the function it performs is closer to a practical asset purchase. The wealthy sample, on the whole, treated clothing as the second, not the first. The seventh category is not a single product. It is a pattern that underlies all six of the others, and it's the one that does the most long-term damage. Lifestyle creep is the tendency for everyday spending to inflate in step with income, so that every raise, every bonus, every bump in earnings gets absorbed immediately into a more expensive version of ordinary life. Corley found that 56% of wealthy respondents actively and deliberately lived below their means, not because they were forced to, but because they had decided to maintain a gap between what they earned and what they spent. Roughly 22% of his self-made millionaire sample were what he called saver investors, people who consistently spent less than they earned and routed the difference into productive assets, year after year, regardless of how their income changed. The other 78% of millionaires in the dataset still reached high net worth, but the saver investor pattern, in terms of long-term financial outcome, consistently outperformed every other profile. The deeper pattern across all 7 categories is the same. Each one is a place where spending is driven by an external signal, a brand, a status comparison, a social expectation, a momentary urge, rather than by direct utility to the buyer. Wealthy people, in Corley's data and in the broader research literature, had systematically removed those categories from routine spending, not out of deprivation, but because they had calculated, consciously or by habit, how large the long-term transfer actually was. One small daily purchase feels like nothing. 12 months of it, compounded across a decade, moves a meaningful amount of money from your future self to someone else's quarterly earnings report. If you want to understand the other side of this equation, not just what wealthy people stop spending on, but the specific financial habits Corley found they consistently built instead, that video is on your screen right now.